I love the idea that we're producing truth. This is about truth. We live in a world that is full of non-truth and fake information and politicians who lie to us on a regular basis and don't even know how to tell the truth. And that truth, it turns out, is beautiful. And here I live in a world that is based solely on a single truth, that there is a best way to proceed.
If you're tired of arguing with strangers on the internet, try talking with one of them in real life.
Welcome to Back in America, the podcast.
Today I have the pleasure to speak with Dr. John Edwards, the International Correspondence Chess Federation Grandmaster and the 32nd World Correspondence Chess Champion. He won the title in 2022, is the only third American to hold it, and was named 2023 U.S. Chess Grandmaster of the Year. John used to work in tech at Princeton. He has written over a dozen books like Teach Yourself Visually Chess and the ChessBase Complete. And he breaks down how to combine big databases and AI to play with precision.
It might be surprising for our listener to understand that you play chess against another human being, assisted by a computer, which is now an AI, right? And in the server that we saw downstairs, you've got databases full of previous moves. Basically, all the moves have been analyzed, which means that the computer knows what's happening on your screen and can give you references to other games, etc. So where does the human come into play?
Well, not really in the opening, because the databases are such that the opening, which can last up until move 30, is done. There is a database that is maintained by the Chinese, largest opening database in the world, and they basically, if you put the move in, it will say this move is good, or this move is less good than that, or this move is terrible, and it will tell you why. And this is useful all the way through to about move 20. Today, if I want to learn an opening, it might strike your listeners that learning a complex opening must take years. Actually, it can be done in minutes now, less than seconds, frankly, if the servers are powerful enough. The end of the game's been solved. We're up to 7 now. After all of this time, we have solved the game for any 7 units that you put on the board. It will tell you if you're winning, and if so, how. I work at Bell Labs, so we're familiar with what they did. The graphical interfaces with mice, Unix, C++. This was Dennis Ritchie. This was Brian Kernahan. They cared more about chess than they did about all those amazing things that they wound up working on that they're famous for. And they had this notion that the opening was being solved. True.
Mm-hmm.
If we solve the end of the game, put 5 pieces on the board and the computer will tell you this is a win or a draw. 6 pieces, it's exponential. We're up to 7 now. After all of this time, we have solved the game for any 7 units that you put on the board. It will tell you if you're winning, and if so, how, and if it's a draw, then how. So that leaves a conversation in the middle. The opening's done, the end game's done. There's this shrinking conversation in the middle of the board that the neural net has to deal with. It is my contention that this middle game is not so small and it's not really shrinking. It's still substantial. And there are a class of positions that involve fixed pawn structures in which the maneuvering can go on for 50, 60, 100, 200 moves in order simply 30 moves, in my case, to win a tempo, to win a single move, to get the pawn to move forward. And then we start this over again. And that leaves for rich exploration in the game.
Do you think there is an element of human psychology?
Of course, but not the way people might imagine. I can't bluff anybody, so that's out. But can I steer the game into positions with fixed structures such that the method that I just described can work? If I do select an extremely complex line with fantastically involved combinations, it's going to be a draw because the machine is good at that, and it will guide me through, and there's no room at all for human intervention at all. Rather, it's this long, slow, plodding maneuvering of spending 35 moves to win a tempo, where humans excel and the machines kind of wonder what you're doing.
You started playing 50 years ago, I believe.
Yes.
What hooked you at first and what kept you coming back to all those games throughout the years?
It's very comforting. So as a young person, typical male, I had ADHD, which meant that I was flying in every direction all at once. But chess was grounding. It provided action in a fixed space, and it settled me down. More to the point, when I was in 4th grade, I got mononucleosis, which back then meant that I would be in bed for 6 months. If I was lucky, more likely a year. And my father asked, how can I make this less onerous? And I said, could you get me a chess book? We'd had a visitor to the house, and he'd played chess and asked, I had a chessboard. I wasn't good. And he beat me. And he beat me again, and he beat me again, and he beat me again. And I didn't like that. But I was also curious as to how it was that somebody could be good at this. So I asked my dad to buy me a chess book. The book was Great Moments in Modern Chess by Reuben Fine. I remember it distinctly. And I was in bed. I was reading the book. And 4 or 5 days later, he came in and said, how are you doing with that chess book? And I said, well, I finished it. It's a 300-page book with lots of games. And he said, you finished it? I said, yeah. You want to quiz me? And he started to ask me questions about it. And I had imbibed the book. And after that, he started to buy me a book a week. There's a very good parenting point here, is that when your child expresses an interest in something, however unusual it might be, you support the interest. They were tough lessons because he had no patience.
Yeah.
But I took to those lessons very rapidly. With the result, I also started playing in tournaments. I started winning money, which impressed my parents, impressed me too.
How old were you at that time?
By the time I was winning money, I was 14.
14.
But I had been taught correctly.
Yeah.
And I had done exactly what you're supposed to do without realizing that this is what you should do. I had played over lots of games. I had studied the game the right way.
Yeah.
It's, if you want to build bridges, you should look at how 100 or 200 bridges are built. You'll look at how it's been done. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was looking at how the best players in the world had played. And you can't help, after a fashion, to start, if you only see good moves, you start making good moves yourself.
So moving on, you worked at Princeton University in technology, right?
Yes.
For many years.
24.
Before returning to full-time chess.
That's right.
And I wonder, how did that work, if it did or not, shape the way you think about intelligence, both human and artificial?
The life at Princeton, 24 years, first as assistant VP for computing and later on as coordinator of institutional communication. It occurred to me as we were doing that we were creating a scholarly environment in every discipline. The key for working with Thoreau was to take a machine, put all of Thoreau into the machine, put everything written about Thoreau, put everything about his life and times, so that a student, when working on Thoreau, doesn't have to spend all their time in the library looking for this material. Let's give it to them. May I tell one quick story that may...
Sure.
I don't want to use the names. We went to see the chairman of the Department of the Classics. This is a fellow who had specialized in ancient Greek and ancient Latin, spent his entire life looking for the derivations of various words. He had written scholarly articles about the 14 uses of a single word throughout the literature, which is not growing. Ancient Greek is ancient Greek. Ancient Latin is not growing. And he was working on another about a phrase. And here we came in with Ibicus, which was the brainchild of David Packard, of Hewlett-Packard fame, and put it down, and he did his search, and lo and behold, everything that he had worked on popped up to the top, except he had missed one. He didn't get embarrassed. He was fascinated that he'd missed one. He was putting in more searches. He was 55 years old at the time. He spent the last 10 years of his professional life turning out more papers in those 10 years than he had in the 40 years of his, and 30 years of his professional life. Never once crediting Ibicus for helping him do the research, but he became amazingly productive. I already had a scholar's environment for chess. And so the key there was to extend this into every discipline I could at Princeton. And by the time I left, we had really done that with phenomenal results.
Do you think you would be where you are today without your experience at Princeton?
We're all creatures of our environment and experiences and the rest. Chess actually was one of the most useful things that ever happened. I rarely ever credited Princeton, but what I was attempting to do was literally to give everybody access to the same kind of environment that I already had, which pleased me no end, because I could accomplish more in an hour with those tools than I had ever been able. I was putting in 7 or 8 hours a day when I was 14 and 15. I'd come home from school and the schoolwork was trivial. I just wanted to get to my chess. And so long as I was getting good grades, my parents didn't care. I wanted to extend the excitement of that, and I could accomplish more now in an hour with these tools than I could in 7 hours. As a kid, if you're playing through a game, you have to set up the board, and you play through each line. If you go through a variation, I may have to go back to the beginning and set up the pieces manually. Now everything's on screen. There's a reference to what happened in the World Championship against a fellow named Osipov, where this is actually the most important part of why I think you're here and why we're having this conversation. We arrived at a position in which the neural net then and since does not really understand what's happening here. I realized there was a pawn on a square b6. And as a human being, I said, well, I've played through enough games. If the pawn were not on b6, but if the pawn were on b3, 3 moves, from b6 to b5, b5 to b4, b4 to b3. If the pawn were on b3, I'd be winning. And I'd be winning because my king would go to this square, my rooks would go over here. From b5 to b4 took 38 moves. Now I had to get the pawn from b4 to b3. And I knew exactly how to do it. But the method required far more than 50 moves. It could not be done more quickly than that. And so the game, in fact, tragically ended in a draw. I still won the world title. But I have to tell you, I had worked harder at that one position than anything in my life. I think the major takeaway is that a year and a half, 2 years before the end of that game, I understood what I needed to do in a way that the neural net did not. I was able to work out the method in a way that the neural net provided almost no meaningful help. I saw all of that. Now, does that mean I'm thinking ahead far further than the neural net? No, I'm thinking in a different way. Chess has a funny rule. If you go 50 moves without a pawn move or a capture, the game ends in a draw. We don't think about what move to play. That strikes everybody as highly unusual. We think instead about where our pieces belong.
So what do you think still separates the creative player from the perfect machine?
A tremendous amount of experience.
On the player side, but I mean, the machine has got the entire humanity of experience.
The machine calculates remarkably well, but it doesn't, it has a hole. And a human being steers every game now into that hole. That hole is pushing every position into those fixed pawn structures with long-term maneuvering. That is the only place where the hole exists. There is nothing else where the machine doesn't completely excel perfectly, where its horizon is not so large that it just overpowers the game. But I do believe that it's possible occasionally to win. Somebody dies. That's what a horrible thing. Why would I want to get involved in a sport where I'm waiting around for 6 months or a year for someone to die? And I think actually, frankly, the rules should be changed so that if someone dies, their games are simply voided unless they legitimately won or lost a game. There are games where humans, make clerical mistakes. I was supposed to play the move f4, and instead, stupidly, I played f3 and I hit send, and I'm a moron for having allowed that to happen, but occasionally that will happen. The third, I mentioned there were 3, and the third is the most interesting, and that is that through our cleverness, and there is a significant amount of cleverness involved, we steer the position into one in which that long-term maneuvering in a fixed structure can occur. There are different endgame types, for example, middle game types, endgame types, that are conducive to wins. I showed you one downstairs. There was a position involved. Both sides had a rook, and both sides have bishops of opposite color. It's a famous endgame. It was popularized by Bent Larson in the 1970s and 80s. And I really feel this, I've been at the forefront of AI for 3.5 years. AI is a better accountant. AI is certainly a better programmer. It will program something quickly and correctly. There'll be no errors. The message for everyone else is watch out. They should get the most general liberal arts education, and they should learn how to think. And they should be prepared, frankly, to understand this environment, to work with this environment in meaningful ways. They're not going to outthink it. They're probably not going to be able to do that. But they need to learn how best to work with it. And the most interesting aspect of this is a paper that was done by a fellow at Rutgers who was looking at the human-computer interface and wanted to know if humans brought anything at all to the party anymore. Now, can't we just turn the whole bloody thing over to a neural net and be done? And I'd like to think that a human being brings something to the party, at least for the next year or 2 or 3 or 4. But it's becoming clear to me that it requires a manic human being to make a difference.
So question about the computer you build and your database. I read that you are using open sources database, right? What are those machines downstairs?
So the machine itself, the big server, is running, ChessBase is proprietary and has its own databases that it provides, but it also allows you to access open source databases. The single most important database is a Correspondence chess game that is maintained by the International Correspondence Chess Federation on a monthly basis. When I trained my own neural net, neural nets contain 2 parts. Part 1 are the rules, and the rules don't change. Everybody's neural net contains that same first part.
Mm-hmm.
The second part is the experience-based, and the experience-based should be based upon the highest quality games. And so I have fed it the games of strong correspondence players.
No.
Imagine ChatGPT having trained solely on the works of Nobel laureates. Correspondence players are at the forefront of chess. The theoretical work is ours. We are setting the stage in the opening work and in middle game ideas that the best players in the world are emulating.
Yeah, I was learning that classic chess players are studying what you guys are doing.
Yes, they care about what we do. We don't talk about it ever, but we're working with some of these folks. And when we find things, they want to know about it, and they want to know about it quickly. And the most fun example, I beat the reigning Russian correspondence chess champion, a fellow named Lobanov, with a magnificent new idea in a variation of the Sicilian, in a variation that I couldn't talk about the game until it was finished.
Okay.
That's an incredible frustration.
Yeah.
This is a beautiful game and a beautiful idea. Right around the time, as soon as the game ended, I forwarded the game to Peter Nielsen, who was Magnus Carlsen's second. And I said, I think you'll find this interesting. Russians are in a terrible spot. They don't have the capital and they can't afford the servers. So in order to compete meaningfully at the world championship level, 2 skills are required. You've got to be a really good chess player. And that's hard enough. Those skills are rare. Not everybody's a great chess player, but it's not enough. You also have to be technically proficient.
So I was thinking the Chinese?
No, there's not a Chinese competitor in the world championship.
So
Germans are the Europeans, primarily the Germans. Yeah, Dutch.
Okay. All right.
And they're all reasonably good friends. When I won the world championship, I picked up my medals in Amsterdam. And I got to meet an awful lot of the folks. I got to sit down with some of those who wanted to do it, but weren't technically proficient and wanted to know, that was the question. The chess skills were there, but how do I build my server and what tools and how do I initialize this and how do I work with a neural net correctly? Those are the questions. The books that I'm surrounded by all these chess books, but these are not the books that we're reading. The books that we're reading are on the top shelf up here. They're on how to program neural nets.
So my last question is, what is America to you?
What is America to me? Currently, boy, an enormous disappointment, an enormous embarrassment. I'm embarrassed by this leadership, which is devoid of the one quality that I care most about as a human being, and that's empathy. I'm not seeing it, and I miss it. I do.
Can America recover?
I think that's a phenomenally interesting question that should be fed to a neural net, because I don't think I'm smart enough to know the answer. But the reality is, the answer is quite possibly no. You know, it's so much easier to tear down a building than it is to build it. The East Wing of the White House is a perfect metaphor for what we're seeing. It got torn down in 2 days. All that history is gone. It got torn down in 2 days. And if we decide that we want to build it or whatever, good luck. I ran for office in that interim period when I wasn't playing chess, and I became mayor of my town. I was on the committee for 6 years. And a certain frustration of having to do things that are of political nature. You need a consensus, which means that you have to settle on the conclusion that no one of us has a monopoly on wisdom. And I think that's what our system of government was meant to encourage. I see no such conversations occurring. And I'm frightened out of my mind that it was so easy to make the transition away from a healthy democracy, maybe not so healthy, but away from a democracy which had its frustrations, but which was absolutely a democracy, to something that doesn't appear democratic.
John Edwards, thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome.